We're going to talk about drugs today a little bit. I'm going to talk about psychedelics in therapy. Psychedelics being adapted for therapeutic use is a relatively new way that doctors and therapists are dealing with the mental health issues that we face in society. So they're proposing that we use like MDMA and LSD to treat stress disorders such as depression, PTSD, and other social anxieties. So yeah, let's start at the beginning. What is a psychedelic? So a psychedelic is a drug that when taken increases connectivity and empathy between individuals through a perceived feeling of complete understanding. So people often take psychedelics like LSD to work through their issues in the right mindset, and they'll attribute the experience to being hugely impactful and positive in their own lives. A good example from our, generation is like Steve Jobs actually admitted to taking LSD over 15 times between 1972 and 1974, which is pretty crazy. He actually said that it helped him conceive of many of the ideas that he had for Apple, and like look at the room that we're sitting in right now, right? So it's kind of cool to note that, it's kind of sweet to note that it's not only like hippie losers taking these drugs, it's actually some people that have, influence in our society. Some examples of psychedelics that are popular are MDMA, LSD, mescaline, and DMT. MDMA and LSD are the ones that are being predominantly considered for therapeutic use. Mescaline and DMT are just examples that I included because they are pretty popular, but I think DMT would be a little bit too intense for a therapeutic session. Traditionally, psychedelics are known as party drugs, so like certain subcultures like ravers or whatever will take psychedelics like MDMA to enhance the feeling of listening to music or dancing. But I think when we're talking about psychedelics in a therapeutic setting, it's really important to make the distinction between therapeutic tool and party drug. Like in a therapeutic supervised setting, you're not taking these drugs just to get like messed up and have fun. You're using them as a tool to work through your issues, and I think that's a really important difference to outline there. And then most psychedelics are scheduled as Class 1 controlled substances by the DEA, which I think is super harmful towards the stigma of psychedelics and how we think about them in society. They've been lumped in with a lot more harmful life-destroying drugs like heroin and crack, and they're just not really the same thing, and I think it's really cool that recently we've been starting to realize the potential benefit that these drugs can have in therapy. So how and why are psychedelics being used in therapy? So there are funds being lobbied by advocacy groups. So MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, which is a mouthful. So they're one of the main groups that is lobbying for funds for psychedelic research. They were founded in 1986, and they're a non-profit organization. They're pretty much spearheading the push for psychedelics being used in therapy. They actually had, just because of funding that they raised, they had the FDA approve MDMA PTSD therapy for phase 3 clinical trials, which is the farthest that a drug of this nature has ever made it in those tests, which I think is really cool. And the FDA actually deemed MDMA as a breakthrough drug for PTSD treatment, which is really, really cool. There's much less potential for abuse and harm than traditional prescription medications, so like OxyContin, Xanax, and Vicodin. These drugs simply destroy lives. A good example to use in terms of PTSD treatment would be veterans coming back from the Iraq War to Florida were actually given blank prescriptions for OxyContin, so that's just an endless supply. They could just go to any doctor and be like, give me this much. And it just created a massive wave of new addicts. And then as well with prescriptions, there's the likelihood of somebody taking them home and then having their kids take them out of their medicine cabinet and share it with their friends. Because, I don't know, like drugs like Xanax are super popularized in the media. There's, I'm sure all of you know, at least 1 or 2 rappers that talk about doing Xanax or lean or any of those other pharmaceutical drugs, which isn't cool at all. And they also have MDMA in PTSD treatment has massive success rates in clinical trials. In MAPS's phase 2 testing for PTSD MDMA treatment, they actually had 61% of their sample group no longer qualified for PTSD symptoms in the DSM-4 after the trials. So I think that's like super progressive. So when we're thinking about psychedelics in therapy, I think it's really important to take into consideration the changing ideology within society these days, and give it a chance. That's it.
Great.